Alright, here we have the episode The Naked Now, which was the first episode to be an hour length, and the second story of Star Trek The Next Generation, and technically the third episode of the series, since the pilot, Encounter at Farpoint, was later divided into two separate episodes. So Naked Now is considered to be the third episode of the series. It originally aired on October 3rd, 1987, which was a week after the pilot. And the story was an original story by John D.F. Black, who had written the story for the original Star Trek series in an episode called The Naked Time, which actually is one of my favorite episodes of the original series. So this was adapted for Star Trek The Next Generation, and the director of this episode was Paul Lynch. Now, the story begins when the USS Enterprise is sent to investigate the status of the SS Siakovsky. And the SS Siakovsky was investigating a collapsing star, and then all the communication was suddenly lost with that ship. And when they arrive, they get a signal from the Siakovsky, and there's this woman who talks in a sensual voice and says, "Well, hello, Enterprise. We hope you have a lot of pretty boys on board because we're willing and waiting." So that in itself is kind of strange. And then all of a sudden the data says an emergency hatch was blown. So somebody did that on their crew. And then the Enterprise sends an away team over, and they discover that the crew is all dead, and they've all killed themselves in various ways. Now, in one room, Lieutenant Commander Geordi LaForge, I'm sorry, this is before he becomes Lieutenant Commander, he is a Lieutenant Junior grade. He enters one room, and it is completely frozen. Somebody has messed with the temperature gauges in there. And while he's in there, Geordi contracts some kind of a virus unknown to himself at that time and the rest of the crew. So that's what begins the story. So they beam back to the Enterprise D and try to figure out what is going on with the Siakovsky and why did all the crew die. So after the away team gets back, Dr. Crusher examines everybody just to make sure everybody's okay. And they are in good health, but she noticed that Geordi is perspiring for some reason. And Geordi starts acting kind of strange, and he complains that it's too hot in the room. So she decides to keep LaForge in sickbay and just to run a few more tests on him. Well, Geordi, of course, does not stay in sickbay when Crusher's back is turned, and who knows why she doesn't have anybody else in sickbay to keep an eye on him. Probably because they didn't hire anybody else to be part of our staff at that point. But Geordi escapes sickbay and wanders into Wesley Crusher's room. And Wesley is working on a repulsor beam and also a device that allows him to imitate other people's voices on board. So Geordi thinks that's really something, and he touches Wesley, just patting him on the back, I believe. But he passes on whatever Geordi's got to Wesley at that point. So meanwhile, Riker and Data are still trying to investigate what happened on the Siakovsky, and Riker has a vague recollection of something similar happening when he was studying the history of the Enterprise. And Data looks this up, and he realizes that the original crew had a similar phenomena happen to them. And what the original crew of the Enterprise discovered was that intense gravitational fluctuations can cause water molecules to mutate in an alcohol-like substance. And with the original Enterprise, they were monitoring a planet. In Siakovsky's case, they were monitoring a star. So it was not the exact same thing, but it was similar. So Picard gets excited when Riker and Data tell him this, and he transmits the message to Dr. Crusher, and they believe they have cured everything, and that the whole thing is wrapped up. But as they soon discover, this virus is somehow mutated. It's not the exact same thing, and before you know it, everyone on board is becoming infected. So that begins the degradation of the crew. And like I just said, this virus acts on people like alcohol, so they lose their inhibitions. And one thing that it does is it makes Wesley drunk, and he somehow takes over the Enterprise. He touches one of the assistants in engineering, and he convinces the engineer to help him, and the assistant engineer actually yanks out all these control chips of the Enterprise, and Wesley gains control of the ship, much to Captain Picard's chagrin there. In other places on board, Tasha Yar gets infected, and she actually comes on to Lieutenant Commander Data, of all people. And somehow Data gets the virus too. And she actually lures Data into her bedroom, and they actually have sex, which is kind of a comical part of the show too. Now, Dr. Crusher passes this on when she originally gets infected from Riker, and Crusher passes this on to Picard. And Picard, I must admit, gets infected pretty easily. They don't actually touch. He just kind of breathes her breath as she's trying to seduce Picard. So everybody gets infected. So, while this is happening, Riker, though he is infected, for some reason, he doesn't exhibit as much behavior as the rest of the crew. So he's kind of the one who is in charge and trying to solve this crisis here. And they're trying to reason with Wesley. Wesley is basically saying, why can't I be in charge of the ship? Why doesn't an adult have to do this? And can't Picard just tell Wesley what to do? And Picard says, because captains control their own vessels, young man, and they go through a little banter with that. But eventually, they realize that the Enterprise is in danger because the star has collapsed, and all this debris and objects are hurtling toward the Enterprise, and if they don't break free, they're going to be dead. So, first of all, they need to convince Lieutenant Commander Data to put all these control chips back into engineering that have been yanked out. So Data goes to work on that, but informs everybody that he will not have enough time to do it before the Enterprise is in danger. They'll be, I think he said, 1 minute behind. So Wesley comes up with the idea to configure his repulsor beam that he made and configure it into the ship. And he uses the repulsor beam to take the Siakovsky and reflect it away from the Enterprise, giving them just enough time they need for Data to repair the ship and for them to be on their way. And that is basically the plot line of The Naked Now. Now, people have different opinions about this particular episode. The director of it, Paul Lynch, he actually remembers it pretty fondly. He says that it was risque in the sense of the scene with Data and Yar, because he says it was something Star Trek had never done before. But everybody had a lot of fun doing that scene, and he got the sense that everyone would want to do that type of thing again. So he especially remembers that one scene with Data being fully functional, and I think that is a big highlight that you see on reels sometimes with that. But one of the producers, Maurice Hurley, he thinks that was a really bad episode because, it had been done before with the original series, and though it gave the crew a chance to interact and show their relationships with one another, he just felt like it was a bad idea and it didn't work that well. I personally have mixed feelings about this episode. I was looking forward to it when I first saw it because, like I said, The Naked Time was my favorite original series episode. But I felt like The Naked Time was done a lot better, and you see a lot more fun things go on with the original crew. Mr. Sulu runs around with a sword with his shirt off. Then there's this crewman named Kevin Thomas Riley, who takes over the Enterprise in engineering. See, that's another remake too. Wesley's taking over engineering Next Generation, so not a lot of creativity there. But Riley was a lot more interesting. He starts fancying himself like an old Irish kinsman and starts singing songs over the intercom, which I think was hilarious. He sings a song called "I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen." So just weird stuff like that. Kirk and Spock get into Kirk starts hitting Spock because Spock can't stop crying about his conflicted emotions. So all those things, I thought that was a lot more fun on The Naked Time. This one, the changes are a lot more subtle in the crew. It is kind of fun. I think it is kind of funny with Data, but even with that, the idea of Data even being infected in the first place, they kind of answer the reason behind that just with a joke. He says, "Oh, humans have pores, I have pores. If you prick me, do I not bleed?" But it really doesn't make any sense for an android to get drunk like that. So, I didn't like that as much. Now, as you can see, from this episode on, Troy's look is different here. She's got that bun look in the first season. Not my favorite look, but it's different from the pilot, so that's noteworthy. So yeah, I enjoyed bits of this episode, but I felt like the characters should have done a lot more outlandish things, having been infected. I felt like they could have had a lot more fun than they did. And really what they did with this episode is everybody in the crew just basically gets horny with each other. People are kissing and all that kind of stuff, which is fun, but it feels like it's not as creative as it could have been. So that is the episode The Naked Time. Stay tuned for next Monday when I review the episode Code of Honor. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.